In this chapter, we're going to take the render of the character that we've done up to this point and bring him into Photoshop to start adding more of an idea of where we want to go with him. The concept was a good start, but now we've gotten the character to a certain point. We got to see what we have to do to finish to make him A, match the concept, and B, just look as good as he can possibly look. So I'm just going to bring that render into Photoshop as a TGA. TGAs retain alpha information, so we can put them on a separate layer and move them around and see what we want to add. One of the first things is his arms are looking a little bit bland. He's kind of a stylized character, so we kind of want to add a little bit more defined musculature into him. So I'm just going to paint a really quick idea of what I think would look interesting. I'm just sampling colors from there, and sometimes the Wacom's sensitivity won't work, so you gotta test it and make sure it's okay. And then painting in some wrinkles on some of the pouches that we did. But we also want to use this stage to kind of look at the proportions. A lot of times when you're working on a character with a lot of props and stuff, and you keep building all this stuff up, you might lose sight of where you're really working, what you're really working on. So it's nice to bring these renders back into Photoshop and see what areas look wrong to you. These are guidelines for yourself. At Blur, we actually have a great team of concept artists who have a wonderful understanding of anatomy and form and design. And they do all of our paint overs on our characters about halfway through the model, or whenever we really need help. But when you're working for yourself, you don't have that option. So doing it yourself is something you just kind of have to do sometimes. But it's so much faster to do it this way than to try and figure it all out in the model. Another reason I like ZBrush, same reason, is just that you can kind of test and play really fast instead of having to model it in and duplicate the object and find out that what you did didn't work. But all of this is just kind of fleshing out what more we need to do to this character. His neck kind of got a little bit soft, so maybe enhancing some of the edges in there might be something I want to work on. And I know one area too is his shoulders look a little bit funny to me right now. So definitely want to play with that too. More of a cleft in the chin too, to keep a little bit of that heroic look, even though he has that big scar across the face. I don't want to work with the proportions a little bit here. And what I'm going to do is using in the new Photoshop is a tool called Warp, which kind of works like the old Liquify tool worked, but a lot faster. So you can make selections and work on those, or just work on whatever your layer selection would be, whatever your layer would be. And it kind of works with a really simple grid, and you just move the points around to where you want, which is great for reshaping characters to see where you need to go with them. You can see what happens if we don't have a selection made. It actually just uses the entire canvas. I want to get rid of that one layer. I'm just going to paint in a little bit. I think it needs to be a little thinner, so I start painting in the black in those areas to see what it would look like. Maybe show off a little bit more of the chest too. So though we're painting in shadow, this kind of gives an idea that we're going to have to push some verts there to make sure that when the light hits it, that it casts some shadow there. And enhance some of those wrinkles on that shirt. And the jacket too. And now's a good also time to start thinking about other details to add to the jacket. You can see I'm kind of painting in some buttons or maybe some patches on the jacket. This is a good stage now to start looking at the little details that we need to do to finish this guy up. So I'm duplicating that layer so that I can run the warp on it and finally start adjusting that shoulder area. And I can toggle it on and off and see what the changes actually look like. So I can see that looks a lot better. And then maybe something that the belt's actually attached to. At this point right now, it's kind of just floating around the jacket, which could work. This could just be something that he straps around his jacket to keep it tied and straps those pouches to. But at this point still, if you remember from the first chapter, we talked about putting a gun on the character, and we still haven't done that. It's something we're going to want to do pretty soon. We still have these pouches all over the place, so we're getting really repetitive. So pretty soon we're going to sketch in what the gun might look like. Still looking a little thick there. Overall, just looking at all the details on this character and seeing where we need to go. The paint over really is just one of the most important steps of doing a model, I find. It just helps me really visualize what the character might look like as we go, instead of just trying to figure it out in the model. So you can see the jacket is a little bit more enhanced with all these little wrinkles being pulled here and there. The arm has a little bit more detail to the muscles. But there's still something missing, I think. I think the main thing that's missing is that gun. So we're just going to paint away this pouch here. Just by sampling the colors around that area, we're able to quickly paint it away. This doesn't have to be perfect. This is just for our own use, so. Jacket gets pulled a little bit under here. Sample these colors again. Now we've magically erased where that pouch was. Now you can really witness the true ability of my amazing painting ability here. But it doesn't have to be perfect. Once again, this is just for my own use, and I'm going to look at reference of real guns to build this thing. But I want to see where it might dangle on him and how it might look. I could even make this thing a lot rougher looking than it is right now. But, well, maybe I couldn't. I don't know. That'd be pretty hard. It's pretty rough looking. But I do think it looks more interesting than having that pouch there. So maybe bring another pouch over to this area. Make them a little floppier than they are right now. Something still feels like it's missing a little bit. Yes, the attachment of the gun to the actual character. So we're gonna have a strap here, maybe two straps here, and then one that goes across the leg to kind of make sure when he runs it doesn't flap around too much. Gotta try and think of these things about how they might work when they're moving. And there's some little finishing touches, even though this is just for my own sketch to see how it looks. But if this was something we were going to send to a client, we want to make sure that it was at least somewhat apparent about what we're going to do with it. And the nice thing about Blur is that they have such a talented artist upstairs who can concept this stuff out and make it look so very nice. Sometimes it's hard to tell that it's not even a render. It looks so well done. We're just going to collapse that so we can kind of toggle between the two and see what we've done. You can see the two changes. We've fixed up the shoulders, added some more detail. I think overall it's looking a lot better. But the big thing that we added here was the gun, the holster. And one option is to actually build this gun from just from looking at reference. But there's another way that I model a lot of stuff that I figured I'd show you right now. Which is, I'm just going to sketch out kind of what I'm going to build. It's going to be a very loose sketch. This is going to be the holster. And I'm going to think of it kind of like a piece of fabric that is unfolded. Or if you haven't built anything, then think about it like a UV map that's all attached and how it would all go together. And then we're going to merge this in as a plane and actually cut in our detail like that. So here we go. Let's duplicate this. I need a little bit more room. I could just adjust the canvas size, but it'll be just as fast to draw it in like this. And we don't want to make this map too big. There's no need for it. It's going to be very simple drawing. But basically the idea here is that you just want something that you can bring into Max and really see where you're going. It's almost like a stencil that we're drawing right here. Which will make more sense in a second, I think. So shrink it down the brush a little bit. And then this is the flap that goes around the whole thing to keep the gun in place. Computer's sleeping. Hang on one sec. Here we go. All right. And then this piece would go like that. That's where the button will go. And those are the straps that go around the leg. So I'm just going to save this as a JPEG to bring into Max. Okay, so we're in Max. Basically just made a plane the exact same dimensions as the image that we just made. And then I'm just going to drag this over on there. And I imported the JPEG as an image, and I made sure it was toggled to be displayed in the viewport. And we have everything being displayed in the viewport as well under display options. So it's under material, under display options, and the image is turned on. And now we're just using the cut tool. And I'm just cutting around this little stencil we made. So if we turn that on to wireframe, you can see what it's actually doing. Just roughing in the form here. We don't need to worry about how well it works together. We're going to change a lot of this stuff. But we'll have the basic outline ready to go. So we're deleting the outside of that object. And we didn't put the straps on there because we'll build those next. But for right now, this is going to be great. So I could just inset this. That's one way we could do this. But I want a little bit more control for how I'm building this. So I'm actually going to cut it all in. So I'm just cutting in this detail where I need it. And jumping down on this side. I've got this moved over. And since I'm looking only in the front view, I can move any which way I want, and I'll make sure this is all flat. Once again, back in the cut tool. And then instead of connecting each edge, I'm just going to do this all really quick. Grab the edges, and I have my hotkey for connect set to space, so I just click space. There we go. There should be enough geometry for this to fold around itself now. And then we just want to start making all of this a little cleaner. It's all still just a flat plane, but we're roughing in where the holster will soon be. I've actually made this a little bit backwards, but that's okay. We'll fix it in a moment. Gun would go in there. I'm going to add that shell modifier on this so we can kind of bulge it inside of itself into the outer amount, and then into the inner amount a little bit as well. Then pull this around. We want to make sure this actually would fit a gun inside of it. Right now it looks like a pen holder. And one thing that's nice about starting from this method where you start with a plane is that you can kind of see where you're going to be drawing. It's kind of like painting in your edge loops before you go, which you could do also just by setting up a character with a simple material on it, and then just drawing in with Polyboost the way the edge loops could go. So you could just having that display to kind of see where you're cutting stuff. Actually, the next disc, when we have textures on things, we're going to be able to use those textures to build a little bit more modeling details, enhance some of the scar and whatnot. So just because you're texturing stuff, you can still use texturing as a modeling tool. I detached that flap because we're going to do some stuff with it pretty soon. And it was in the wrong place to begin with. So bringing in the polyboost tools right now, so I have them ready to go when we get a little further along with this piece. And here we go. Got a couple faces floating here. Got to kill. Now I wanted to show the border tool here. It doesn't work too well in polyboost. The border tool is a great tool, except for if the normals of the two faces that you're trying to connect are not being able to be displayed like the proper way, you won't be able to connect the two because one polygon is facing one way and the other polygon is facing the other way, and you can't see them both at the same time. It's actually something that's in there to protect you from connecting it to other side of objects or any other open edges that might be floating around. So I'm just insetting, and I'm just trying to basically get a good look at how this thing's going. But the shape got a little messed up, so I'm going to use an FFD to make it look better. I'm going to kind of taper off a little bit at the end because it's a gun. And flipping that polygon, that whole set of polygons, and connecting it to this side of the actual gun holster. Putting a turbo smooth on the whole thing to see how it looks. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Okay, so this would actually hold something at this point. See, our FFD is set to work only on a selection right now, and since we had no selection when we left, we had the whole object being used. So I reselected the parts I wanted to have the FFD effect, and then collapse the FFD. So at this point, a lot of it's just tweaking. So now we're just going to add a little bit of the stitching and ribbing that would happen if you had multiple pieces of leather being attached to each other and stitched together, and just kind of adds a little bit more, especially when we start doing, when we have the lights in there and we render it out. If it was all just flat, it would look pretty boring, so whenever you can add a little bit of a seam or some stitching, it's always fun. We need some more geometry in here for when we curve this thing around. Gonna cut this up a little bit, clean that up. Oop. And start rotating this thing. We could do this also with FFD. Any way you want to get it over is fine. We just want to make sure this thing looks like it's closed, and we have to remember that we also have the shell modifier on top of this, so having a little distance is okay. You can see we still have a little bit to go before we're actually looking closed. Pull that down a little bit to cover up some of the handle of the gun. And that's getting a little bit high up top over there. And we want to make this a little bit more closed off. Move that there. All right. You can see this got a little bit pointed down here. The gun should actually be pretty thick at this point, so I want to move this stuff into place. So it's looking pretty good overall. Have this be a little bit more pointy at the end. And then inset that so it has a little bit more, and we'll have a little bit more polygons to make this this little seam right here. We did that by making an edge loop, converting it over to vertexes, and then moving along the local normals. Just pushed them all in evenly. Now we're going to make the button. And I'm just going to duplicate this polygon. Oh, I'm sorry, this isn't the button. This is actually going to be the strap that that closes this whole piece off. We'll build the button in a moment. So we just duplicated a polygon off of that, and then dragging the shift dragging the edges to make this little strap. Then we want this to kind of close up a little bit, and maybe curl out a little bit too, because the button kind of pushes in at that point. So the little extra flap kind of goes over. And then once again, we're going to inset and move along the normals. A little rotation to make that have a little more interesting shape to it. And then just pull that out so it's not intersecting into itself. It's looking okay, but we want to make sure it's not going to clip into the gun when we build it. Alright, everything's not penetrating, so that's good. Then we're just going to move this stuff around. Take a look at how it looks overall. Pretty happy with it. That other side's a little boring, but it's overall pretty much a holster. So I'm going to have to take a look and see what we have left on this piece. And so we've really roughed out most of this holster shape. We just got a little bit more left to do before we start building the gun that's going to go inside and edit it a little bit more. Still have to build a button, and I want to add some more seams around it so it looks a little bit more interesting. A little smooth around the sides right now. So I think next we're going to build the button. Actually, let's clean this up a little bit before we do that. I'm going to grab that inset piece again, and we're going to just kind of move some stuff around. Okay, so that looks like a separate little piece of it. I'm just going to chamfer that edge, so it's a little bit, little sharper actually, even though that's kind of smoothing that edge out. We want it to kind of stand out when the mesh smooth is on. Right now it would just kind of overall smooth the whole thing out, which wouldn't look too good. So once that's in place, we'll be ready to move on to adding the last little bits of details. And a lot of this stuff, stitching and some of the leather stuff, we're going to do with the next disc with normal maps and with just texture maps in general to kind of fake some more detail on this piece. Little extra props like this, we don't want to spend too much time with just the modeling, but you still want to get all the core detail in there. And once that's in place, we'll be pretty much ready to go to begin texturing it and adding all the detail that really helps sell it. A little computer freeze here, just 1 sec, and we'll get back into editing this thing. But it's a good point to say that coming up next we're going to start building the actual gun. And we're not going to build the entire gun, just the handle, because we're not going to actually pull this gun out for this character. If we were, you'd want to actually spend some real time on a prop, but for props that are just kind of character dependent, such as this gun, or maybe if you had a knife strap somewhere that you weren't really going to use, you could just build just what's shown. And I've mentioned that before, of only building and really focusing on what's actually seen on a character. So it's important to keep that in mind. You want to spend as little time as possible on all these little bits, but you still want, when you look at the overall picture, you want to be able to easily tell, oh, that's a gun or knife or bandana or whatever you're going to put on there. But coming up next, we're going to actually build the gun piece, which really just wanted to add it because when we start texturing this, it's going to add a lot more detail to just color breakup. A little silver piece and different material there. So we're going to build that piece of gun kind of just like we built this holster by starting with a plane. There it is. And I'm not going to make a map for this one because I have a good idea of how a gun holster looks, and a gun handle. I'm going to move this into place. And then just kind of adjust a few edges here. Drag another one off. And you want a gun handle to kind of curve with the hand. So it should look kind of natural. Let's move this out of the way so we can actually see what we're doing. And we're going to use the shell modifier once again to give this thing a little bit of substance. So we don't have to really worry too much about having a solid object right now. So yes, I just broke this off, so it's not exactly all quadded, but we'll fix that in a moment. Now we grab these center points, go to world move, move it a little bit on Y, and then grab that center edge and move it a little bit on Y to have kind of a little bit of a soft feel to it. And then it kind of bulges out toward the end of the handle. And then we want this to be smooth. We don't want it to kind of only bulge on a couple edges. We want the overall thing to do that. So I'm going to cut and paste the Turbo Smooth and shell from the holster. Want that piece to be big. That's where the handle is going to go into the metal piece. Make that a little thicker. And then just duplicate that polygon. You can see here, we don't have to keep starting from boxes or anything. We can just duplicate polygons, and that's the big reason I don't do box modeling, is it's just so much quicker to just duplicate a polygon and draw out where you want stuff to go. Just want anything, but it really just depends on what you're faster with and what you feel more comfortable with. This, for me, just works a little bit better. It has to do with the software I learned on and just the different techniques I've picked up, but this should give you a couple ideas of how I like to go about stuff. I find it interesting how every modeler I've met has their own methods for doing the exact same things. Never know what you're going to pick up. One of my favorite parts of working at Blur is just dealing with so many really talented artists. And everyone there is very friendly about sharing their ideas. And I know a number of them are actually doing DVDs soon too, so be sure to pick those up. I don't get profits from that. So we were just roughing out the trigger, the hammer of the gun, filling in these little gaps here and there. I'm just duplicating a vert, grabbing 4, making a face. Making a face, and duplicating the vert, grabbing 4, making a face. Just another method you could use to actually build faces. I don't know why I like to do it. I just think it's kind of a quick way to make faces instead of just dragging out and target welding if you have to. So we're going to add a little bit of dimension to this now, even though we still have the shell modifier on there too. And this is a metal piece, so it should be pretty sharp. So these areas that we're smoothing out so much, we want to keep as smooth as possible. You can see here we're just going to add a little bit more size to this too. But this is kind of the plastic piece, and there's also a metal piece that's going to go kind of in the middle of these two the handles. So we're going to build that in a moment too. I'm going to do that really simple though, just by detaching this and moving it in a little bit. You can see the 2 shell modifiers on there. Give it the illusion of being, different pieces kind of welded on top of each other. It's great for making armor and stuff for characters as well. As I mentioned earlier, if you make sure that your interior ID is set to a different face ID, you can easily select and delete those parts so you don't have too much geometry for no reason. Just gonna make that edge a little sharper there too. And then connect this to keep everything as quads. There we go, we got a gun started now. Giant compared to the holster, but we'll shrink it down. Now we're going to put a symmetry modifier on here to make the other side of the gun. Just hit 1 whenever you're on a modifier that has options. You'll go into its number 1 option. 2 will go to the number 2 option. So you can kind of quickly navigate through your different elements or different options you have for objects. So like for edit poly, it'd be number 1 would go to vert, number 2 would go to edges, number 3 would go to open edges. 4 would be polygons, and 5 would be element. You can see this gun's a little thick, but overall it's looking like a gun. The trigger is looking insane, but we'll fix that right now. Just gonna move this into place a little bit. And once again, we're not building a full gun here. We're just building the general idea of a gun, the the holster part that's going to be shown. So moving ahead here, I've actually put the holster in place and given it a render to see what we're at. And you can see I've added that strap that was holding everything on together. And there's still a lot to do though. Still not overall happy with all the proportions, and that the crotch area got really oddly separated here. Looks like he's a little bow-legged. I have some weird brush settings. I'm just going to reset here. Okay, some options got locked, so we're going to duplicate this layer. I like having all my paints on a separate layer, or at least duplicated layer, so that when I toggle back and forth I can see what I've done and make sure that what I did was actually an improvement and not detrimental. So obviously the pants got a little thin in that area, so we're just going to kind of thicken that a little bit and pull the strap out a little. And then the pants should kind of overlap a little bit more than they are right now. Those wrinkles, there should be more tension pulling that. But he's getting pretty close. We got a lot of the props in place now. In fact, I think we have all the props in place right now. So once again, thickening those pants. They should be kind of baggy. Right now, and right where they were before, they were a little too tight. We don't want to make it too tight in that area though, because when we put the rig on them, it'll be a pain in the butt if they're kind of overlapping like they are in this drawing, to rig and to weight all the verts and everything. So I think his crotch might have been a little too low, so we're just going to see how it would look if he had a higher crotch. And sometimes it's fun to animate. So here's where we're at with the face, but still some stuff we got to do. I don't really like the way the shoulder and that neck and everything are looking right now, so might use the warp modifier. We might use the transform warp to really quickly reshape and see and make sure that we like the way it's looking. And I'm pretty sure we won't, because those shoulders look pretty bulged out right now. Like he's got shoulder pads. Reminds me of like a old 80s Michael Jackson jacket or something. So we got to fix that up a little bit. So in looking at where we're at now, there's just a few more edits we want to draw on this, and then we're going to jump back into Max and actually do those changes. If we could do a lot of work on the paint over, but since this is really just for our own use, we just want to get the idea so that we know what we're doing in Max and we can keep referencing back to it. Still need to build the interior of the teeth, which I might not show actually being built, but all the same techniques we used, because I like the way the lip kind of snarls up there, and it'd be nice if when we render him out, if you had a little bit of the teeth, just kind of, you can notice that they're kind of poking out a little bit on that face. Sorry for the little pause here. It looks like the computer's having a little trouble keeping up. So here we go. Alright. So we want to work on these shoulders like I mentioned just a second ago. I'm going to fade out the two edges here and just rotate. And yeah, I can already tell that his shoulders were just looking kind of funky the way they were. To be a little lower and a little more angled. Put them on a new layer. Fade out those two parts. And then we're going to use that transform warp again, which this has to be my favorite new feature in Photoshop since the healing brush, which is just a great tool too. We'll use that a lot in the next chapter. And the next DVD. Another nice thing is you can actually, just by hitting Control H, hide that warp, so you don't have to actually see it while you're working. You can hide it and move stuff around. Just gotta keep a mental image of where that grid really was. Not sure how much of this we're really gonna do in there. We're just kind of experimenting to see if it looks better or not. I think it does. I think his arms was looking a little thick. we're kind of back looking at that shoulder. I'm just kind of taking a look to see how much more work we're gonna have to do in there, and I can tell it's just it feels a lot better now, but we still want to do some work because it doesn't quite feel natural. So when we go back into Photoshop, or excuse me, when we go back into Max, we're going to do some edit poly modifiers, edit poly modifications, but we're also going to use the FFDs just on the head and that area to kind of move everything. Maybe pull his neck up a little bit too. It looks a little squat. Might help improve him a little bit. Sometimes when you have Max and Photoshop open at the same time, the two of them are a little bit of memory hogs, so it can kind of slow down the entire process a little bit. So we're just going to have to wait for the computer to wake up a little, and then get back into this and finish off our paint over, and then move on to actually back into Max. But we're getting pretty close on this paint over being finished. As soon as it wakes up, we're going to get back into just a little bit more edits on this neck area, and then I think we're ready to jump over and start doing these changes. But just to recap once again, using these paint overs as a modeling tool, and then also painting in kind of a rough guideline before you start actually modeling a new prop, can save you a lot of time instead of just trying to rough it all out in your head and in the polygons. And so we're just going to use that again and see how this looks. Maybe pull this up a little bit, pull the collar up, and bring the shoulders down a little, add a little bit more curve in there, a little more narrow. And we'll just paint over and make this close off. Still think his neck looks a little squat in there, but that looks a lot more natural to the curve. Doesn't feel so much like he's got a doesn't feel so much like he's wearing shoulder pads. But those boots are pretty thin. They actually kind of look like they're painted onto his feet. So we want to thicken those up. Yeah, and pull this side out a little bit too. You can see that's gonna already, yeah, it looks more like boots now, big heavy work boots, which is what we want. I think now we're pretty much ready to go back into Max. So I guess we'll start off with doing some of the pants edits that we did before. If you remember, it looks a little square in there. So I'm just gonna use a soft selection here. Reference back to my paint over. And then just kind of pull this together. Easiest way is just kind of pick a central point and then scale it on the inside. But then we want to make sure that that zipper that we modeled earlier actually fits in there. Then adjust some of the butt there. Looks like this button got thrown off a little bit, so we'll put that back in place. And then rotate this into place. Those little straps should be attached to the belt pretty much, so let's do our best to get them on there. Some of these were kind of penetrating a little bit, so we want to fix that. You can see his strap now doesn't actually go over his pants, so we're going to fix that pretty soon. But pants look better, the crotch area. But I think it'd be cool if we had a little bit more of a seam in the jacket too, and we kind of painted that in the Photoshop section of this chapter. So I'm just going to constrain this to edges and then scale down on Y so that that's flat, because I want this seam to be flat. And maybe a little curve to it to go with his body, but overall pretty flat. And then we're going to grab these two edge rings here and connect a loop. I want to kill this edge that's been floating there because we just want to keep this as close to quads as possible. You can see we have a lot more cleanup on the jacket to do, which we'll do later on before we start rigging. And cover that. We'll use the build end tool again. Just gonna clean up a little bit more of this jacket where this piece is. You can see there's a lot of really sloppy geometry in here because we worked so hard on the cuffs of this, but then kind of got a little bit lazy on the back of the jacket, it doesn't have enough geometry to connect very nicely, and it's also interpenetrating a lot. So we're just going to move some points around and connect some areas and make sure it all works together. And jump ahead a little bit. And grab those two seams that we just drew in there. Oops. Grab the two seams, convert them to vertex, and move along the normals and just push them into the body a little bit. You can see that's already adding a couple more details. We've moved past most of the blocking in stage now. All we're doing now is a lot of detailing, which is why those Photoshop edits come in handy. You can see I messed up there when I did my when I did my rotate. I didn't have it in the center, so it rotated all these objects wrong. Each one was being rotated instead of both of them at the same time. So the strap now is penetrating into that. The button got moved in the wrong place. So I either have to fix it or reduplicate those objects. But didn't mess them up too bad, so I'm able to fix them pretty quick. And then this I need to fix up a little more. Pull it down a little bit and add a little bit more geometry. And then fix any areas that get penetrated. And then to make it look like the belt has more tension, pull some of those areas out. And make sure that there's no penetrating from the back too. Penetrations can be a real problem. Even if something looks good with a turbo smooth or mesh smooth on, a lot of times you'll notice that from a far away shot, you might not even need to turn the turbo smooth on. So if you have stuff that penetrates, even if it looks fine when you've got a mesh smooth on, it will look terrible if for some reason they didn't use it. So you got to make sure that there's no big areas like that show up. Then we're just kind of breaking symmetry on the jacket there by pulling the collar down a little bit and adding a little bit more wrinkle here. Just overall taking a look at where we're at. We've got pretty close to what we did in the paint over now. Except for the shoulder stuff. That's the last big thing we have to do. And it's just about time to do that now. But when we do this, it's going to mess up. We've got 3 layers of this character right now. If not, maybe 4 with his head floating there too. So we could move every polygon or every group of polygons as we go. But that might get a little tedious because we've got so many objects we have to go fix. So one thing we can do is just take all this into ZBrush and move it from there, which is something I'll do most of the time. But another thing you can do is running an FFD on a character, which we're going to do in a second. But here I'm going to look at the wireframe and see through, and I can see that his shoulder and his jacket, there's a little bit more float than needs, so I'm going to pull those points wherever I can. But now I want to make sure that this head looks a little better. The anatomy is pretty off right now. So I grab both objects I want to work with. I put an FFD on, and I use box instead of a set number, so I can actually add a lot more divisions. Because I don't want to have it happen where I start moving the head, and the shoulders and arms start moving. So here we go. He's got kind of a funky look right now, but with the jacket and everything, I'm gonna exaggerate some of this part a little bit. Where should this go? Needs to be widen that up a little bit. They were getting a little narrow. And pull that shoulder up a little bit too. So I moved the head up a bit too, but I don't know if it's too much, so I'm gonna move it just a little bit back down. I think that overall looks better. Then I'm just pasting instanced on all the turbo smooths so that they work as one. I can turn it off and on as I want. Got a big slit in the throat there, but we'll fix that pretty soon by snapping verts. You can see that our FFDs won't work on all these different objects because the pivots are all different on everything. I want to pull that up a little bit more too. Maybe not that much, but a little bit more because it was looking a little low. And then since a little bit of his belt's exposed here, or it might be a good idea to actually build a underbelt, the part that actually holds his pants up. So I duplicated that edge ring. I'm going to copy the shell and the smooth from the other belt that we built, even though it won't really be seen too much, so we don't have to worry too much about how it looks. It's just that extra little layer of detail that might help. It's fun making these characters with all this stuff kind of strapped on, and you know. Take a quick look at how it holds up with our concept. And we can see we got almost everything in place. Just a little bit left to do on this chapter. First, we want to just fix up some of these areas that aren't quite holding up as well as we'd hoped. The eyes don't quite fit into the head now that we've moved some stuff around. And then these pants don't really look like tension. They look pretty forcibly moved. So I'm going to move some of these verts around to try and help integrate the two objects a little better. And then I don't really like the way the wrinkles down here were looking, so grab a few edge loops, start scaling and moving them so it kind of breaks it up. They were getting a little bit mushroomy, a little kind of looked like a little clouds or something. But it's okay because they should be kind of soft down there. Don't want to do too much there, but we want to make sure that it looks like cloth is being folded over the boot down there. So moving ahead a little bit more. Seeing what we have left. The anatomy is looking a little bit better on his body here, but I want to adjust a few verts that got kind of moved out of the way in places I don't like. It's looking okay. Everything's fitting together all right. A couple little seams here and there to fix, but it's looking pretty decent. Once again, that area is kind of still bugging me, so I'm going to work on the wrinkles in this area. Should look like it's got a little bit more weight to it. Right now, it was all kind of floating. And we're going to pull some of this stuff in because it was getting a little too bulged out in those areas. Looks better. Still like the wrinkles on the other side better, but that's okay. Let's move some more verts around until we get it to a point that looks okay. So then that's basically how we would use Photoshop to plan out what edits we want to do. The paint over stage. It's a really important stage, and if you do it right, it'll really save you a lot of time. And if nothing else, it'll just kind of give you a clearer idea of what you want to do with your model without wasting time in Max. You can do a lot of different experiments with it. Here's just a quick render of all the changes we did, and I think that about covers us in this chapter. So we've added new props, fixed up old props, and basically we still have a couple little last bits of modeling to do before we get into the finals. So I'll see you in the next chapter.